Electric Friends, a Gary Numan podcast, celebrating the tracks by a musical pioneer.
One thing I've learned from doing this podcast about Gary Numan and his discography is how it has allowed me to reevaluate certain songs from over the years. As a long-time Numan fan, I don't really dislike any of his songs, yes, even the Machine and Soul era, but there were songs that for whatever reason I'd never taken to too much. But having re-listened to, again, and researched for this podcast, I've gone, wow, why have I never really been that bothered about this song before? It's great. And this episode is all about one of those such songs for me personally. Technically, it's not even a Gary Numan song, but for this episode, we look back at Paul Gardner's Stormtrooper in drag.
And so here am I, grabbed by John's nether vound. Oh, I can call and make you crawl into bed. Questions, always questions, I just speak in slow motion about obsessions with boys on the floor. Take the smile of your face, wipe the tear from your eye, don't say you're sorry for me. Take that smile of your face, wipe the tear from your eye, don't say you're sorry for me.
The title alone has got to get you interested off the bat. Now, I have to admit, all these years I have been picturing the Stormtroopers in Star Wars, which is quite the image when you think about it. The Empire Strikes Back had just come out at the time after all. But from what I can tell, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Stormtroopers in question here are actually of the German soldier variety. Stormtroopers, or Sturmtruppen, were specialised German assault troops that emerged during World War I. They were created to break the stalemate of trench warfare and were trained to carry out fast, aggressive attacks against enemy positions. But anyway, Stormtrooper in Drag was the debut single by Paul Gardiner, released in 1981. It was co-written by Paul with Gary producing at his Rock City studios in Shepperton. Though it was released under Paul's name alone, it is often credited as Paul Gardiner featuring Gary Numan, and also appears on a number of Numan's compilation albums. Mainly, of course, because Gary sings lead vocals on the track. It was published by Numan Music and released by Numan's then current label, Beggar's Banquet. Gardner and Numan were credited with guitar and bass respectively, contrary to their usual practice. Both also play synthesizers, while Numan's brother John Webb played drums. Now, beginning with John Webb's plodding drums, the song has a mysterious and moody air about it from the start. It is a surprisingly beautiful yet melancholic song. Lyrically, it has a retrospective feel about loneliness. Gary sings it in such a drawling style, it's quite difficult to make out what he's saying at times, but that just adds to its mystique. The combination of Gary's suave vocals, growling guitars and pulsating bass and percussion make it an excellent precursor of what was about to come on the Dance album.
Now look at me, like a stormtrooper in drag. I bet you feel exactly like I do. It's so disgusting, I'm so tired of rhythm and dealers in arms. I don't want your point of view.
The lyrics sound as if they are about drugs of some description. It's so disgusting, I'm so tired of rhythm and needles in arms, and I don't want your point of view. Sound like someone who is deep down sick of addiction and knows that they shouldn't be doing it, but they also don't want to hear about it and want to somehow find their own way out. The chorus sums this up. Take that smile off your face, wipe that tear from your eye, don't say you're sorry for me.
It's like, love it, I need to rise like some boys cry. Love it, I need to rise like some.
And I just love the moment where the song comes to a halt as Gary proclaims, "Stop it," as if he's telling his detractors or inner demons to leave him alone.
Stop it.
result was quite a departure from the electro-pop sound that had become Numan's trademark, featuring a vocal performance and sonic jazz-like textures that looked towards his next album. The single only reached number 49 in the UK charts in 1981. This was relatively disappointing if this was a Gary Numan single, but because it was credited as a Paul Gardiner solo, it was perhaps lost by the record-buying public at the time. So maybe if Gary was credited, it would have done better. It certainly deserved a top 40 placing. As it was a beggar single and Gary hadn't started to get totally ignored by radio yet, I'm surprised it didn't get picked up more and do better than it did. The track was the first product released by Numan or any of the former members of his backing band following his farewell concerts at Wembley Arena in April 1981. It also marked the first time in their 4 years of working together that Gary and Paul, who had been together in a band for a number of years, had collaborated in the writing of a published song. As both Chris Payne and Russell Bell explained on the podcast in previous episodes, Paul was asked if he wanted to be part of their splinter group Dramatis, but instead he wanted to pursue a solo career. Paul Gardiner sadly struggled with heroin addiction in his last years and died at the age of just 25 from an overdose of Valium and Diconol combined with cold weather on the 18th of February 1984 in Lime Trees Park in Northolt, Greater London. He was survived by a son Chris, who also has a son named Dylan. We'll tackle Paul's life and music contributions in more detail in a future episode, but his death hit Gary hard. He wrote in his Revolution book,
1984 had the most awful start. Paul Gardner was found dead on the park bench on 4th of February. He had committed suicide with a deliberate overdose of heroin. I knew Paul had troubles, and had for some time, but he'd only spoken to my mum a day or two earlier, and he had arranged to come in for a visit a few days later. He seemed reasonably together, and we were all hopeful that he was getting through it. There was no indication at all that he was suicidal, quite the opposite. I talked to Paul many times about him rejoining the band as soon as he sorted himself out, told him that his place would always be waiting for him. Part of the reasons for bringing him on stage in London during the tour have been to try and give him a sense of what was waiting for him, how much people cared for him. I don't think the reality of him being gone touched me fully until I saw his coffin being carried in for the funeral. But it hit hard then, the sad waste of it. Paul had been such a good friend and a staunch ally through the most tumultuous days of my life. He was easygoing, kind, just a lovely person to be around. We'd gone from nothing to number one together, and now, so soon after, he was gone.
The B-side to Stormtrooper and Drag was another song about drugs. Night Talk is about a man dealing with a lover who is an addict. Both tracks showed promise for what could have been a full album by Paul, but sadly this didn't materialise.
Office in the side street, there's no place for you. Night talk and romance like beating along. Boys like me aren't supposed to cry, but it's so easy to do. Boys like me aren't supposed to cry, but just look at you. Light talk. All like boys.
Gardner's recording of the Velvet Underground's Venus and Furs was the first release on Numan's own label Numa in 1984, soon after his death. The single's B-side, No Sense, was also written by Gardner.
Shiny, shiny, shiny days of forever. Whiplash got out in the dark. Guns and bells, you're seven forsaken. Strike the mistress of pure good hearts.
Gary later wrote the song A Child with the Ghost from the 1984 album Berserker, in memory of Paul. He also paid tribute to him on the 10th and 20th anniversaries of his death by playing Stormtrooper and Drag on his 1994 tour, later released on the 95 live album Dark Light, and he also played Night Talk at a 2004 charity gig. Stormtrooper and Drag is included on various Gary Numan albums, including the CD reissue of Dance and the compilations Numan, The Best of Gary Numan in 1982, Exhibition in 87, and the Premiere Hits in 96. It was also covered by Saint Etienne for the Numan tribute album Random in 97.
So here am I, quite by chance near the phone. I can call and make you crawl into bed. Questions, I just speak in slow motion. Had obsessions with boys on the floor. Take that smile off your face, wipe that tear from your eye. Don't say you're sorry for me. Take that smile off your face, wipe that tear from your eye. Don't say you're sorry for me. But don't go. My multiply is like nothing I need to rise. Don't feel like nothing I need to rise.
And Ter Tamelitz recorded a piano version on the tribute album Replicas Rubato in 99. Looking at your comments about the song, Paul Demon said it's one of my favourite songs of Numan's. At the time, it was great to hear Paul and Gary working so closely together again. Also a blessed relief to be able to get new music after the Wembley gigs. The song itself is a wonderfully seedy and antagonistic in its lyrical content, but also tinged with sadness, the acknowledgement of the drugs issue that Paul was going through. The bass is brought wonderfully up front, and Gary's vocal is so relaxed and breaks through the self-conscious insecurities he seemed to suffer around this time. R.I.P. Paul. Paul Pablo Hines said, my favourite song by Numan, though officially it's Paul Gardiner, love the track so much. Paul Hunston said, I always thought it should have been marketed as Gardner and Numan with very little replay and no TV exposure from memory. Love Saint Etienne's remake on the Random album. Paul Anthony Fleming said, such an underrated song musically and vocally, it's perfect, very atmospheric. Bought it in a record shop opposite the Hammersmith Odeon on Hammersmith Broadway along with some Numan badges. I think it could quite easily have been a double A side with Night Talk. Alex Jones said it was the first song I ever played drums on with my first proper band in 1983. Loved the song. And Homer said, brought it on the day of release, thought it genuinely had something different from Numan's mainstream work. Still stands up today. A pity it didn't do better in the charts. So while not officially a Gary Numan song, Stormtrooper and Drag has a unique place in Gary Numan's history. It showcases Paul Gardner's bright spark that shone all too quickly and remains something of a hidden gem in the world of electronic and new wave music of the early 80s. And talking of Numa Records earlier, Gary recently announced that the Numa Years albums are now available again digitally on Spotify and elsewhere, which is great to see. So that includes Berserker, The Fury, Strange Charm, and Machine and Soul, among others. And meanwhile, Raven Numan has continued to release new music, including a new track, In Your Head, which I enjoyed a lot, so check it out if you haven't already. So that's it for this episode. Thanks for joining me, Electric Friends. I'll be back next time with another track from Gary Numan's history. If you'd like to get in touch, please do at newmanpodcast@gmail.com or head to socials. I'm at Numan Podcast on Facebook, X, Instagram and TikTok, and you can also find all episodes on YouTube, including video versions of my past interview specials. I'd also love to read out your emails about your own personal Numanoid stories, about how you became a fan and your favourite Numan memories and songs. Just like Steve Hurst did, he said, just listened to this again and wanted to give my feedback on my 60th birthday today. I first got into Gary's music from Our Friends Electric and have brought almost every one of his records since, even through his rough times. I got into his music initially because it was so new and different and I loved his image. I love his honesty and went to Wembley Arena a couple of years ago after going to his farewell concerts there in 1981. Keep up the good work, love the podcast, so thank you very much, Steve. And so please send in your own at newmanpodcast@gmail.com. And also head to newmanpodcast.com for more. And please subscribe, rate and review if you haven't already, and spread the word to your fellow Numanoids. So that's it, and for now, speak soon.
Eccentric Friends, a Gary Numan podcast celebrating the tracks by a musical pioneer.